everyone, welcome back. The learning outcomes for this video is to factor trinomials when the coefficient of the second degree term is not 1. I will also show you various methods for factoring trinomials. Okay, so before we begin, let's do a real quick review of the last thing we worked on, and that was factoring trinomials where the coefficient of the squared term was 1. Recall we talked about the various strategies you can use. The most important one is knowing your sign rules, because if you know your sign rules, you know what the signs within the binomials are. You'll also know with your two pair of numbers what their signs are as well, because the sign rule tells you a lot about the larger and the smaller number of the pair that you pick. So let's begin. The first thing you want to do is to use your sign rules to eliminate any choices to where there's just no way possible it could be the answer because it has the wrong signs. So looking at the trinomial that's given, the back end, recall if the back end is negative, that means the signs are going to be different. So first of all, we're going to cross out any signs now that have the same signs. In other words, two positives or two negatives. So that means we can automatically eliminate which two choices? That's correct. We can automatically eliminate B and C. There's just no way possible that could be the answer, because the sign rules tells us that when we have a negative in the back end, the signs will be different. The other thing the sign rule tells us is that the middle term will tell us the sign of the larger number. So in this case, it's telling me that whatever pair of numbers I pick, the larger number has to be the negative, which means by default the smaller number will be the positive. So we look at possibilities of getting 63. Well, of the choices we have here, it's 9 and 7. So 9 is my larger number. It should be negative, which means 7 has to be positive. So I can automatically see that the correct choice or the correct answer is D. Now, if we're not sure, you can always verify your answer. Recall I told you there are two things you can do, two criterias rather, that it must meet if you have the correct pair. So you are looking for a pair of numbers that when you multiply the two, they will equal your last term of negative 63. Those same two numbers, if you were to add or combine them together, it will give you your middle term of negative 2. So if we plug in that negative 9 and positive 7 to see if they meet those criteria, sure enough, they do meet both criteria, so that means that D is indeed the correct answer. Okay, so let's get started with section 6.3. In this section, we're going to be factoring trinomials to where the coefficient of the squared term is some number other than 1. With those, you'll want to utilize some type of factoring method. I'm going to introduce you to 5 of the most popular ones out there, but there are so many different methods out there, I couldn't begin to cover them all. If you don't like any of the ones that I'm showing you here, you can always Google on YouTube, just type in factoring trinomials, and you'll see there are a lot of instructors there that are showing you various methods. So there are a lot of different methods out there. Now I'm going to begin with the trial and error method. We are asked to factor 3x squared minus 10x plus 8, which, by the way, I'm going to use this same equation for all the different methods just to show you that they all work and that you'll still wind up with the same exact answer. So step 1, before you start any factoring of trinomials, look at all three terms and make sure that there's no GCF, because if there's a GCF, then that would be step one, is to take the GCF out. Since we don't have a GCF here, we're going to go ahead and proceed. So the next thing is to look at your signs and determine what your signs are going to be in your binomials. So recall, if the back end is a positive, that means the signs are the same. What type of signs? Our middle term tells us that they're going to be two negatives. So now that we know that, the next thing we want to do is focus on finding out what numbers we're going to be plugging inside the binomials. So let's start with the first term first. There's really no other way to split 3x squared up other than having a 3x in one and x in the other, because you must have an x in each one. You can't put both x's in one binomial. So now that we have the first terms correctly placed, the next thing we're going to do is focus on what are the last terms. So step 4, write a pair of the last terms whose product is 8. So we have to look at all the possibilities and ways of getting 8. We know 1 times 8, 2 times 4. Whenever you have a number such as 8, which is a composite number, anytime you have a composite number, it's actually best to check other possibilities other than the one with 1. In other words, the 1 and 8 possibility, I will probably try that last. I will try the 2 and the 4 first before I try the 1 and the 8 when it's a composite number. Now, if you ever have a prime number in the back, then there are no other possibilities other than that number and 1. But in this case, this is a composite, so we're going to try the 2 and the 4 first. So to split that up, we can put it with the 2 first and then the 4. Now, that will produce a totally different result as turning it the other way. We have to also try the other way of the 4 first and then the 2. Next, we can then, if those two don't work, then we want to try our pairs with the 1 and the 8. So you can try it with the 1 first and then the 8, and you then try it again with the 8 and then the 1. But the bottom line is, yes, whenever the coefficient is some number other than 1, you have to try it both ways if it doesn't work the way that you have the first time. And that's why they call it trial and error, is because you're trying it, you're looking at the possibilities, seeing if it works. If it doesn't, you go on to the next possible pair until you find the pair. So by trial and error, by trying it out and see, that's how you find the pair. Once you find the pair, here's how you can verify whether you have the correct pair or not. If you were to add your outer and your inner terms, and they happen to equal whatever your middle term is, then you know you have the correct pair. Again, outer and inner, when you add them together, they will always equal your middle term. Okay, so let's check outer and inner of all of those possibilities that we just talked about and see which one of those is the correct pair. Okay, so let's look at all of the possible factors, starting with the first one of 3x minus 1 times x minus 8. So if we combine outer would give us negative 24x. Inner is going to give us negative x. Combine those two together, and that's going to give me negative 25x. That is not my middle term of negative 10, so that means that that cannot be the correct pair. So let's go to the next one. Outer, negative 3x. Inner, negative 8x. That equals, when you combine them together, negative 11x. That is not my middle term. So that can't be it. Let's try the pair of 3x minus 2 times x minus 4. Outer is negative 12x. Inner is negative 2x. That's going to give us a total of negative 14x. And again, that is not my middle term. So we have one last possibility. And if this does not work, then we would say that this trinomial is prime, which means it cannot be factored, because there are no other possibilities of getting an 8 other than 2 and 4 and 1 and 8. So let's check our last option. Outer is negative 6x. Inner is negative 4x. Combine those two together, and yes, that will give you negative 10x, which is our middle term. So therefore, the last option is the correct factored form for this trinomial. And there you have the trial and error method. Next method is the AC factor by grouping. With the AC factor by grouping method, you're going to start out by first identifying the coefficients of the three terms. So the coefficient of the first term, we call that A, and it's 3. So A is 3. The coefficient of the second term, we call that B. So B is negative 10. And the coefficient of the last term, we always call that C. So C is 8. Again, A is 3, B is negative 10, and C is 8. So once you identify their coefficients, the next thing you're going to do is multiply A and C together. So when we multiply 3 times 8, we get 24. The next thing you want to do is find all the factors of 24. In other words, the two numbers that when you multiply them together, that's going to give you 24. Now we already know from this trinomials, the sign rule tells us that our signs are going to be two negatives. So I'm going to go ahead and write all the possibilities with both numbers being negative. So now you want to ask yourself, out of those possibilities, which one of those possibilities, when we add them together, is going to equal our middle term of negative 10? Well, if you said the pair of negative 4 and negative 6, you are correct. So we're going to use these pairs to utilize a method that we learned in a previous section called factor by grouping when you have 4 terms. How are we going to get those 4 terms? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to split up our middle term. So right now our middle term is negative 10x. So keep that in mind. So if we split up that middle term, negative 10x, because negative 4 combined with negative 6, when you add those two numbers together, yes, you will get negative 10x. So once you split up that middle term, in other words, rewrite it, you now have 4 terms. And recall, when you have 4 terms, we can utilize the factor by grouping method, which means you're going to group them in pairs of 2 and take the GCF from these pairs. So let's start with the first pair of numbers. We want to look at those two terms and see what is it that these two terms share in common. And the only thing I can see that they share in common is an x. So that's called my GCF. I'm going to take that x out. And then whatever is left, I'm going to place it in parentheses. I'm going to do that same procedure for the second group. I'm going to look at these two terms and say, what is it that they share in common? And the only thing that they share in common is a 2. But I have to factor out a negative 2. Recall from previous lessons, if a binomial or polynomial starts with a negative, you're going to factor out a negative. So let's factor out a negative 2. And what's left, we're going to place in parentheses. And notice when you're using the factor by grouping method, whatever is left over once you take the GCF out will be identical. So we're not done because I can see that we still have a GCF of those two terms. And what is that GCF? That is correct. The GCF is 3x minus 4. And what is left once you take that GCF out? Yes, x minus 2. And there you have it. We factor the trinomial and we have the same answer we did when we used the trial and error method. So there you have here the factor by grouping method. And next we have the bottoms up method. Now the first part of the bottoms up method is very similar to how you started the AC factor by grouping method. So recall you had to first identify the value of A, the value of B, and the value of C. And recall we said that A is 3, B is negative 10, and C is 8. And remember the next step was then to multiply A and C together. So you're going to do the same. When we multiply it, remember it's 24. But from this point on is where it's going to be different. So here's what we do with that 24. Right now you have an 8 for your last term. We're going to drop and get rid of that 8. We're going to remove that 8 and replace it with whatever A times C was. And in this case it was 24. So remove 8 and replace with 24. The next thing you're going to do is we're going to drop the coefficient of the first term. So recall the coefficient of the first term is 3. So the coefficient of A was 3. We're going to drop that 3. We're not dropping the x squared. We're just dropping the 3. And the reason we do that is because it just makes it a lot easier to factor trinomials when the coefficient of the squared term is 1. So based on the sign rules, recall if the back end is a positive, the signs are going to be the same. What type of sign? 2 negatives. So we're looking for 2 negative numbers that when we multiply them, they equal positive 24. Those same 2 numbers, when we add them, it's going to give us negative 10. So those 2 numbers are going to be the negative 4 and the negative 6. Okay, are you with me? Good. All right, so we're going to continue the process on the next page. The next step in our bottoms up method is to divide the constants, which are the numbers, the number 4 and the 6. Divide those by the original value of A. And recall A is 3, so divide those numbers by 3, not the x's. We don't divide the x's, just the numbers. And then we're going to simplify those fractions and read bottoms up. So the first fraction, 4/3, we cannot simplify that any further. It is already simplified. Let's look at the second fraction, 6/3. Yes, we can simplify that because 6 divided by 3 equals 2. So when we simplify, this is what it looks like. Now we're going to read bottoms up and we're done. So to read it bottoms up, starting at the bottom, 3x minus 4, and the other binomial is x minus 2, and there you have it. We have the same answer we got using those other methods as we did here with the bottoms up method. This next method have been referred to as the cross multiply method, the scissor method. So let's see what that method involves. Now, I got to say, I did not come up with this method. I credit it to a student, one of my students in my classes. I don't remember their name, but I credit that student for showing me this particular method. I think it's pretty cool. Anyway, let's proceed. So the first step, the student said, is to draw a cross and then write the first terms at the beginning of the cross and then write the last terms at the end of the cross. So let's go ahead and do that. So in terms of the beginning of the cross, the only way you're going to split x squared up, remember, is you're going to put a 3x in one and an x in the other. There's no way of splitting that up. Next, we're going to put the last term of 8 at the end of the cross, and we're going to go ahead and try it with the 2 and the 4, or the 4 and the 2, and not the pair with the 1 and the 8, because most likely it is with the 2 and the 4, as we know. So we also know that both of the numbers will be a negative, because remember with the sign rule, if the back end is a negative, the signs will be the same. What type of sign? 2 negatives, and that's why they're written with 2 negatives there. All right, next we want to just cross multiply these terms. So let's see what that looks like. So let's begin cross multiplying the terms. I'll start with x times negative 4 equals negative 4x. 3x times negative 2 equals negative 6x. When we add those together, they will equal negative 10, which is our middle term. And so we have the correct pair. And we also have it already factored in the form of the binomials. So recall that the signs are going to be 2 negatives, so we already know that. But here are your 2 binomials. 3x minus 4 times x minus 2. And there you have it, the cross multiplication method. The next method is factoring using FOIL, in other words, working backwards. In this problem, we're asked to complete the factorization. 2x squared plus 5x plus 3 factors as 2x plus 3 times what? Well, in order to find the other binomial, all we have to do is to plug in one of the choices and use FOIL. And if it brings you back to your given trinomial of 2x squared plus 5x plus 3, then you know you have the correct pair of binomials. So let's test the first one to see if the x plus 3, if that is the missing binomial. So when we pair that with 2x plus 3 and we use FOIL, first, outer, inner, last, next is to combine outer and inner. So when we combine outer and inner of 6x plus 3x, we're going to get 9x. We're not going to get our middle term of 5x. So since we don't get our middle term, that is not the correct pair. Okay, so since we don't have our middle term, that's not the correct one. So let's move on to the next one. Let's see if the 2x plus 3 that was given, should it be paired with the 2x plus 1 in order to get the correct answer? Let's check. If we do FOIL, first, outer, inner, last, next combine outer and inner. When we combine outer and inner, that's going to give us 8x, which again is not our middle term. So choice B is not the answer either. What about the missing one being 3x plus 4? Well, let's pair it and see. When we do FOIL, first, outer, inner, last, our middle term is going to be a combination of 8x plus 9x, which gives me 17x, and that certainly is not my middle term. So C is out as well. We have one more option. We have x plus 1. So let's pair it with x plus 1 and see if that is our missing binomial. So when we pair those together and do FOIL, F-O-I-L, first, outer, inner, last, combine outer and inner, 2x plus 3x, that does give us 5x, our middle term. So that is the missing pair. Again, notice it brings us to the same as our given trinomial. Gives us the same answer. So that is our pair. It factors into 2x plus 3 times x plus 1. The last method I'm going to discuss is the elimination method. So as you know, your test is going to be multiple choice. And so let's just say all of those methods I went through, let's say you didn't quite get it. Let's say it went over your head. Fine. No stress. You can actually use strategies that I told you, such as keeping in mind your sign rules and also checking outer and inner, different things that you can do that can help you narrow down the choice and give you a better chance of getting the answer correct if you just follow those different strategies. So first of all, let's take a look at our sign rules. The back end is a negative, which means the signs are going to be different. So let's take a look at any choice to where we can eliminate it because the signs are the same, because there's no way possible the sign could be the same. So yes, that means automatically I can eliminate A, because once you do some eliminations, it increases your chances of getting the correct answer. Now, it's not always going to be where you're going to eliminate on every problem. There might be maybe one or two problems where, yes, you can eliminate some choices based on sign rules. And for those that are left, you can eliminate those based on outer and inner. If you combine outer and inner equals your middle term, then you know you have the correct pair as long as your first terms check as well. So let's go ahead and check outer and inner there of what's left. So of the B, choice B, outer is going to give me negative 60x. Inner is x. When we combine those, we get negative 59x. No, that is not our middle term. So it cannot be B. Let's move on to C. Outer, negative 20x. Inner, 3x. Combine those two together, that's going to give me negative 17x. That's not my middle term either, so it can't be C. Let's move on to D. Outer, negative 4x. Inner, 15x. Combine those two together and it gives me, ding ding, 11x, which is the correct middle term. So we don't need to check the last one because we already have the pair. But just in case, hey, let's go ahead and do it. 2x times 2 is going to give me 4x. Inner is going to give me negative 15x. And no, that is not my middle term. It gives me the opposite of my middle term. We've already established that D is the correct answer. And the other thing I want to point out is, remember we said that the back end is a negative, the signs are different. Don't forget that the middle term tells you the sign of the larger number. So it says your larger number should be a positive, which means your smaller number is going to be negative. And sure enough here, if we look over here, our larger number is positive and our smaller number is a negative. That was the only pair that worked and that gave me my middle term. And we could also do a little check of our first terms. That checks out as well because 2x times 5x, it does equal 10x squared. So everything checks out. Last term checks out as well. 3 times -2, it does equal -6. That has to be the answer. And there you have it. Elimination method. Just simply utilizing all the strategies and all the things that you've learned to help you arrive at the correct answer. Okay, that's it for this lesson. Thank you for watching MVP Tutorials by your instructor, Dr. Speights. I hope you'll join me in the next lesson. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. Goodbye for now.